A man no one knew grabbed a woman no one could save and ran back into a burning building, while every powerful person in Seattle ran the other way. He wasn't a firefighter. He wasn't a first responder. He was a building inspector in a worn jacket, a quiet single dad who packed his daughter's lunch every morning and drove a truck with a cracked windshield. But in 60 seconds, he made a decision that would shake the most powerful people in that city to their core. And when the Marines showed up, that's when everyone realized they had no idea who they were looking at. Drop a comment with your city below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now. You don't want to miss what comes next. The rain had been falling on Seattle since early afternoon. The kind of slow, gray drizzle that makes the whole city feel like it's holding its breath. By 6 o'clock, Harbor Crest Hotel was already electric with the kind of energy that money produces the clatter of champagne flutes, the low murmur of self-important conversations, the practiced smiles of people who had spent their entire careers learning how to look important in a room full of other important people. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, moving quietly through the service corridor on the 4th floor, was a man that nobody noticed. Ethan Walker, 38 years old, 6 feet even, with the kind of build that came from work, not a gym. His jacket was dark navy, faded at the elbows. The kind of jacket you wore because it was warm and you didn't care what anyone thought. He carried a worn leather clipboard and a heavy-duty flashlight. And he walked the corridors of the Harbor Crest the way a man walks through a place he knows better than the people who own it, slowly, deliberately, reading every detail. He pressed 2 fingers against a ventilation grate on the corridor wall and held them there. Nothing, no airflow. He frowned, made a note on his clipboard, and kept walking. Ethan had been contracted to perform a routine pre-event inspection for the hotel. Nothing glamorous. Check the emergency systems, verify the smoke suppression equipment, sign off on the evacuation routes. A 3-hour job for a man who had been doing this kind of work for 6 years. Ever since he'd come home from overseas, and ever since he'd come home was making sure important thing in the world was making sure the building his daughter walked into didn't have a problem that somebody missed. It was that simple, that quiet, that invisible. He ducked under a maintenance access panel near the fire suppression hub on the 4th floor and crouched down, running his flashlight along the underside of the system housing. What he saw made his jaw tighten. 2 pressure regulators, both showing green on the indicator lights, both, when he ran the physical check, responding with the resistance of something that had been deliberately depressurized. Ethan sat back on his heels and stared at the gauges for a long moment. Green lights, wrong pressure, in a system that was supposed to be the first line of defense if something went wrong. He climbed back out, straightened up, and walked directly to the hotel's security office on the 2nd floor. The man behind the desk was named Gerald Foss. He was the hotel's head of operations, a thick-necked man in his mid-50s who wore his authority the way some men wear cologne too much, and clearly trying to cover something up. He was on the phone when Ethan walked in, and he held up one finger without looking at him. Ethan waited. 30 seconds. A minute. Gerald hung up and looked at him the way men like Gerald look at men like Ethan, eyes doing a quick calculation. Status assessed, interest calibrated accordingly. You the inspection guy? Ethan Walker. Building safety. He laid his clipboard on the desk and pointed to the notation he'd made. Sir, I've got a problem with your fire suppression system on 4. The pressure regulators are showing green, but both of them are physically depressurized. That means the system would activate the alarm indicator without actually triggering suppression in the event of a fire. On a night like tonight, with this many people in the building, Walker. Gerald cut him off with the ease of a man who had cut off a lot of people. We had that system inspected 6 weeks ago, passed full certification. Then something changed in the last 6 weeks, Ethan said. His voice was even, not aggressive, just certain. I've also got irregular readings from 2 of the smoke extraction fans on the upper floors. They're running but not at rated capacity. if smoke pools on 3 or 4. The event tonight is in the grand ballroom, Gerald said, pulling the phone toward him again. Second floor. Your concerns about 3 and 4 are noted. They need to be more than noted. Ethan kept his voice measured, but he leaned forward slightly, resting one hand on the desk. If there is a fire in this building tonight, and I'm not saying there will be, but if there is, you're looking at impaired suppression, impaired extraction, and a building that is full of civilian guests who are going to be following emergency lighting into corridors that are going to fill with smoke faster than your evacuation plan accounts for. Gerald picked up the phone and dialed. I'll have maintenance take a look. Thank you for your time. The dismissal couldn't have been cleaner if he'd printed it on hotel letterhead. Ethan straightened. He picked up his clipboard. He looked at Gerald Foss for one long moment, the look of a man who has learned that the hardest part of his job isn't finding the problem. It's being believed, and walked out. Back in the corridor, Ethan stood still for a moment, thinking. 6 years as a building safety inspector. Before that, 8 years in the Marines, the last 4 as a rescue and extractions specialist operating in environments where missing a detail didn't mean a write-up on a safety report. It meant someone didn't come home. He'd developed the habit in Fallujah. Reading a space before entering it. Not just seeing what was there, but cataloging what shouldn't be. The door hinged the wrong way. The window latched from the outside. The floor that didn't creak where a floor like that should creak. The same instinct that had kept his unit alive in 2 combat tours was now telling him something in the Harbor Crest Hotel was wrong in a way that went beyond deferred maintenance. He started moving again, this time toward the restricted section of the 4th floor, where security tape cordoned off a suite that had been converted into a private demonstration area for the night's headline event. He knew about it because he'd read the event briefing before arriving. Victoria Reynolds, CEO of Arca Defense Systems, was presenting a classified prototype to a group of military procurement officials and private investors. The kind of technology demonstration that required NDAs, private security, and at least 2 people in the room whose specific job was to make sure nobody talked about what they saw. Ethan hadn't thought much about it when he read the briefing. Events like that happened in hotels like this. His job was the building, not the business. But standing now in the corridor outside the restricted suite, he noticed 3 things. First, the security guard who was supposed to be stationed at the door wasn't there. Second, the ventilation access panel on the wall beside the suite door, the same type of panel he'd already been inside once, tonight was not fully closed. The edge was a 1/4 inch proud of the frame, the way it looks when someone opens something and doesn't quite get it all the way back. Third, there was a smell. Faint. Almost nothing. But he knew it. Accelerant. Not fire. Not smoke. Just the ghost of something that shouldn't be in a corridor of a luxury hotel at 6 in the evening. Ethan stood completely still. His breathing slowed. His eyes moved. This was not a maintenance problem. He pulled out his phone and called the building's security desk directly. It rang 4 times, voicemail. He tried the front desk. Harbor Crest, how may I? This is Ethan Walker, Building Safety Inspector, Contractor, IDU, 2241. I need to speak to your head of security immediately. This is not a routine call. I'm sorry, sir, Mr. Kowalski is currently with guests in the... Get him on the phone. Ethan's voice had shifted. Not loud, but it landed with a weight that made the person on the other end go quiet for half a second. Right now, please. Another hold, 90 seconds that felt longer. Then a man's voice, impatient background noise of crowd and music behind him. Kowalski. Mr. Kowalski, this is Ethan Walker, your contracted safety inspector. I'm on 4, outside the Reynolds demonstration suite. The access guard is not at his post. The ventilation panel adjacent to the suite has been opened and improperly resecured. And I'm detecting what I believe is an accelerant odor in the corridor. I need you to Walker. The impatience had shifted to something that sounded almost like irritation at being made to feel foolish at a party. We have private security detail for Ms. Reynolds. The guard rotation changed 20 minutes ago. The ventilation panel, I'll send someone to look. And if you're smelling something, it's probably cleaning chemicals. We had the corridors done this afternoon, sir. Cleaning chemicals don't. I appreciate the diligence. I'll have someone check the panel. The line clicked. Ethan lowered his phone. He stood in that corridor for 10 seconds, which is a long time to stand still when your training is telling you to move. Then he made a decision. He was going to do one more walkthrough of the building. Top to bottom, every stairwell, every exit, not because anyone had asked him to. Not because it was in his contract, but because there were people in this building, tonight, Hundler, who were going to trust that someone had done the job right. And he was the only person in the building who had the training, the access, and the instinct to do that job right now. He started on the 6th floor. The Harbor Crest had 6 floors above the lobby. The grand ballroom and most of the event space sat on 2 and 3. The executive suites and the private demonstration area occupied 4. 5 and 6 were standard guest rooms, mostly empty tonight since the hotel had cleared them for event personnel overflow. Ethan took the emergency stairwell, the one that wasn't used for normal guest access, running up the inside of the building's north wall. The stairwell was dim, the lighting on minimum, because the hotel's energy management system reduced illumination in non-occupied areas. He checked every exit door, every emergency lighting strip, every stairwell pressure indicator. On 5, the stairwell door into the main corridor was wedged open with what looked like a folded piece of cardboard slipped under the base. A small thing, could have been housekeeping, could have been a guest who didn't want to carry a key card. But wedged open stairwell doors changed the airflow dynamics of a building in an emergency. And he marked it and kicked the cardboard out. On 6, he found something worse. The emergency lighting battery backup unit, a gray metal box mounted on the stairwell wall at head height, had its indicator panel dark. Not on low, not flickering, dark. In an active building with a full event running, that unit should have been lit green across every indicator. Ethan opened the panel with the master access key on his belt ring and looked inside. The primary fuse had been pulled, not blown, pulled. There was a difference. A blown fuse fails under load and leaves evidence heat discoloration. Microfractures in the element. A pulled fuse is clean on both ends. Removed by a hand, and it leaves the corresponding backup system non-functional, without triggering any automated fault alert if the diagnostic cycle hasn't run recently. Someone had pulled this fuse since the last diagnostic check. Ethan's jaw set hard. He replaced the fuse from the spares mounted inside the panel, watched the indicators come back green, and stood there in the dim stairwell, listening to the building. Not an accident, not deferred maintenance. Someone had been inside this building's systems tonight, with a very specific purpose. He pulled his phone out again, and this time called the fire department's non-emergency line, directly not 911, because he didn't have a fire, but the department's duty supervisor line, a number he had because his job required it. It rang twice. Fire prevention. This is Lieutenant Graves. Lieutenant. This is Ethan Walker, Building Safety Inspector, license number 7742 Way. I'm currently inside Harbor Crest Hotel on Harbor Avenue. I have evidence of deliberate tampering with multiple building safety systems, fire suppression pressure regulators, emergency lighting backup, stairwell door integrity. There is a major event in progress with several hundred civilian occupants, and I am requesting you send a unit for immediate verification. A pause. You said deliberate tampering? Pulled fuse on the 6th floor emergency lighting backup. Depressurized suppression regulators on 4. Accelerant odor in a restricted corridor. Hotel management has been notified and has declined to act. Another pause. Longer. Then, I'm logging this. I'll have a unit roll in the next. The fire alarm went off. Not a gentle chime. Not the pre-announcement tone that hotels play before the recorded safety message. The full alarm, every speaker on every floor blasting simultaneously. and underneath it, the low, shuddering boom of something that shouldn't have been, in a building detonating on the fourth floor. Ethan was already moving. The stairwell shook with a concussive force that he felt in his sternum more than heard in his ears. His hand hit the stairwell railing, and he took the stairs down at full speed. 3 at a time in the narrow space, his flashlight already in his hand because the emergency lighting, despite his repair, flickered, and then cut to the red emergency-only strips. He hit the 4th floor landing and shouldered through the door. Smoke. Not the gray billowing smoke of a slow fire. Black smoke, moving fast, already banking off the ceiling and dropping. His eyes went immediately to the direction and movement of it, reading it the way he'd been trained to read a space. Not reacting, analyzing. The smoke was coming from the north end of the floor. The restricted suite. He could hear people screaming from below. From the stairwells, the sound of hundreds of people in a ballroom, 2 floors down, reacting to the alarm. The thunder of a crowd mobilizing. From this floor, from the direction of the demonstration suite, he heard nothing. That silence was worse than the screaming. He pulled his jacket up over his nose and mouth and moved toward the north end. The corridor was filling. Not fully, he could still see, but the smoke layer was dropping fast. Which meant the extraction fans he'd flagged were not compensating. Which meant exactly what he'd told Gerald Foss it would mean 45 minutes ago. The security tape across the demonstration recorder was still there. Nobody had cleared it. Nobody was there to clear it. He ducked under it and moved to the suite door. Locked. Electronic lock, green indicator on the card reader. He tried the handle. Locked solid. He didn't waste time. He went to the ventilation access panel beside the door, the one he'd noticed was improperly closed, and pulled it fully open. Inside, the ventilation shaft was large enough, barely, for a man to move through horizontally. He'd seen the building schematics. The shaft ran parallel to the suite's interior wall and had a secondary access point inside the suite's service alcove. He climbed in. The heat inside the shaft was immediate, not the heat of a room on fire, but the heat of a building that had taken a serious hit. Metal conducting temperature from somewhere nearby. He moved on his elbows and knees, holding his breath where he could. Flashlight ahead of him. The secondary access was a grate. 12 inches square, near the floor of the service alcove inside the suite. He hit it with the heel of his palm twice, and it gave cheap mounting screws. Maintenance-grade hardware, and he came through it at floor level, where the air was marginally cleaner. He came up to a crouch and took in the room. The suite had been transformed into a demonstration space. Portable display tables, presentation equipment, a large screen on the far wall that was now dark. Chairs were overturned. The main window on the north wall had been blown inward not by fire, but by the force of whatever had detonated in the corridor outside. And on the floor, half sheltered against the overturned presentation table, was a woman. She was conscious barely. Ethan could see the rise and fall of her chest, could see one hand moving slowly, the way a hand moves when a person is fighting their way back from concussion. She was dressed in a charcoal blazer, dark slacks, a silver lapel pin that had caught the emergency lighting and was glinting at him from the floor. He crossed the room in 4 steps and crouched next to her. "Ma'am." He put 2 fingers to her neck pulse, strong, fast. "Good. Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her eyes opened. Dark eyes, sharp even through the confusion. She looked at him with the expression of someone trying to make their brain work at full speed when it has just been rattled. Her voice was rough with smoke. "What happened?" "Explosion. We need to move right now." He was already doing a physical check, running his hands along her arms. Her head, feeling for obvious injury. A cut at her hairline. Bleeding freely. Right shoulder responding poorly when she tried to push herself up. Possible dislocation or fracture. "Can you walk?" She tried to sit up on her own, and the effort made her face go pale. "I think," she stopped. Tried again. "My shoulder." "I've got you." He made the assessment in half a second. She couldn't walk without support, couldn't support herself with her right arm. The corridor outside was compromised. The elevator was not an option in a building with active fire. The nearest usable stairwell was 30 feet from the suite door, through a corridor that was filling with black smoke. "I'm Ethan Walker," he said, because he'd learned a long time ago that in the middle of chaos, giving someone a name, giving them a specific human being to hold on to, helped keep them calm. "I'm going to get you out. I need you to trust me and do exactly what I tell you." "Okay?" She looked at him. Really looked at him, the worn jacket, the heavy flashlight, the calm in his face that didn't match what was happening around them. "Who are you?" Her voice was clearer now. Whatever was driving her was cutting through the shock. "Building inspector." He said it without irony. "You ready?" Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a laugh. Nothing close to a laugh was appropriate right now, but the shadow of incredulous recognition that this was happening to her. "Building inspector," she repeated. "Right now, that's the best thing you could possibly have in this room." He helped her to her feet, positioned himself on her left side so she could lean her weight onto him without using her right shoulder, and moved toward the door. "Stay low, stay close, match my pace. If I tell you to get down, you get down immediately. Don't hesitate." "Understood." They hit the door. The corridor was worse than he'd expected. The smoke layer had dropped another foot in the time he'd been inside the suite, moving faster than it should have been, driven by the disrupted ventilation and the cascade of the explosion. And what had been a difficult environment 5 minutes ago was now approaching the threshold where visibility dropped below functional. Ethan kept his hand on the wall, moving fast, bent low. Victoria Reynolds' weight against his left side. She was moving groggy, shoulder clearly causing her pain, but moving with the controlled purposefulness of someone who had enough experience with such a function under it. He heard the stairwell door before he saw it crash, as someone from below pushed through, and a shaft of slightly cleaner air from the stairwell. He moved them toward it. 20 feet. 15. A section of ceiling tile gave way ahead of them in the corridor, dropping with a crash and a billow of heavy black smoke. Victoria flinched. His arm tightened. "Keep going." His voice was flat and certain. Not loud. "I see the door 10 feet. The corridor wall to their right was hot. He could feel it through his jacket when his shoulder brushed it. Whatever was burning inside that wing was significant. The suppression system was not compensating. Exactly what he'd said it wouldn't do. He got his hand on the stairwell door and threw it open. Clean air comparatively. Enough. He pulled Victoria through, and the door swung closed behind them. They were in the stairwell, and he could hear below them the sound of the building emptying, the mass movement of hundreds of people. Voices, the continuous blast of the fire alarm. Victoria was breathing hard. She looked at him in the stairwell's emergency lighting. Red-washed, the cut at her hairline still bleeding. "You all right?" he asked. "I've been better. A beat. I'll live, that's the plan." He moved them down the stairs. "Watch your step. Take it at my pace. 3 flights down." She started to flag the adrenaline, doing what adrenaline does when you've spent it. Her legs beginning to shake. He read it before it happened and adjusted, taking more of her weight, keeping them moving. 1 floor above the lobby, she said. There were other people in that suite. Ethan had been carrying that knowledge since he came through the ventilation shaft and saw only her. "How many?" 3 others. 2 procurement officers and my head of security. She looked at him. They were at the presentation table when... Which side of the table? She understood the question. North side, facing the window, the side closer to the corridor. The side that would have taken the primary force of the explosion through the window and door. "Okay," he said. Not reassurance, just acknowledgement. He was already calculating. If there were 3 other people in that suite, and they were conscious, they should have self-evacuated. If they hadn't, "I have to go back up," he said. She stopped moving. "Walker," she said his name without having decided to use his name. The way a person does when something important is happening, and they reach for the concrete. "The building is on fire." "I know." He'd gotten her to the first floor landing. Through the small window in the stairwell door, he could see the lobby chaotic. People moving, fire personnel beginning to come through the front entrance. She could make the last flight alone. She could make it to safety from here. Can you make it down one more flight? She stared at him. The sharp eyes that had been fighting through concussion, now fully present, fully engaged, reading him the way she clearly read people, quickly and accurately. Yes, she said, I can. Down one flight, through the lobby. Out the main entrance. Tell them there are people on 4. He met her eyes. Go. He was already turning back up the stairs when she caught his arm. Walker. He looked back. Her hand on his jacket, the cut at her hairline still bleeding. The red light of the stairwell on her face. Come back. He looked at her for exactly 1 second. That's the plan, he said. And he went back up. The 4th floor was worse. He came through the stairwell door with his jacket over his face. Moving fast, back in a crouch where the air was marginally better. The smoke was thick, not opaque yet, not full blackout. But close. The ceiling tiles above were showing the heat. The wall to the north was hot enough that the air near it wavered. He found the first man, 12 feet from the suite door. A military officer, late 40s, in dress uniform. Conscious but badly disoriented, the concussive force of the explosion working on him, the way it does on trained people who weren't expecting it. Ethan got an arm under him, got him moving, walked him the 30 feet to the stairwell with more cursing and encouragement than any rescue he'd made in 12 years, and sent him down on his own power. The second procurement officer was inside the suite. He'd crawled away from the window and pressed against the interior wall. Hands over his face. Ethan got him up, got him moving. 2 down, 1 to go. Victoria's head of security was behind the presentation table. Exactly where she'd said the north side people would be. He was unconscious. Ethan checked his pulse present. Strong, and did a fast physical assessment. Head wound. Possible rib involvement. But breathing moved air. And air meant alive. He lifted the man across his shoulders in a carry he hadn't used since the last time he'd needed to. In a valley, on the other side of the world, with fire coming from different directions and a different kind of deadline. The weight was significant. The corridor was worse than when he'd left it 2 minutes ago. Ethan Walker put his head down, held his breath, and walked. He came out of the emergency exit on the north side of the building. The cold Seattle night hit him like a wall air so clean it almost hurt. The rain still falling, the flash of emergency lights turning everything blue and red. He went to his knees on the wet pavement, with the man across his shoulders, and didn't fall, because going to his knees was a choice. A controlled movement, not a collapse. Paramedics were there in seconds. He let them take the man from his shoulders and sat back on his heels, in the rain for a moment. Just breathing. Around him, hundreds of people who had been inside the Harbor Crest 20 minutes ago stood in the parking lot and the street. Coats over evening wear, phones out, the whole landscape of a near catastrophe playing out in the wet Seattle night. Firefighters moved. Vehicles were everywhere. He looked back at the building. The smoke was visible from outside now, coming from the 4th floor. North end, exactly where he'd found Victoria Reynolds on the floor. He heard her voice before he saw her. She was standing 20 feet away. A paramedic's mylar blanket over her shoulders, the cut at her hairline bandaged. Watching him. And she was saying something that he couldn't quite hear from here, talking to one of the hotel executives who had appeared at the edge of the crowd. The man gesturing back toward Ethan with the specific body language of someone who is assigning blame. Ethan watched. He watched Gerald Foss from hotel operations appear at the executive's shoulder, saying something with the practiced energy of a man getting his story straight before the official questions started. He watched the executive point at him, directly at him. A specific, deliberate point, and say something that he couldn't hear, but could read clearly enough. Contractor. Low level. Shouldn't have been up there. Ethan stayed where he was, on his knees in the rain. Jacket soaked through, hands on his thighs, watching. Victoria Reynolds looked at the executive, Then she looked back at Ethan. Even from 20 feet away, in the chaos of emergency lights and rain and the noise of 100 conversations happening at once, he could see the exact moment she made a decision about who she believed. She said something short and sharp to the executive. He stopped talking. She crossed the 20 feet toward Ethan. She crouched down so she was at his level, which told him something about her. Right there, that instead of standing over him she came down to where he was, and she looked at him with those sharp dark eyes that had cut through concussion and smoke and 30 feet of dangerous corridor tonight. "They're saying you caused this," she said. "I know." His voice was calm. "Still, did you?" He met her eyes. "You know I didn't." A pause. The rain fell. The emergency lights. "Yes," she said. "I do." She stood up. She turned back toward the executive with the expression of a woman who had built a company from the ground up and knew exactly what to do with a man who was lying to her face. And Ethan Walker sat in the rain behind her and let her handle it. And he thought about his daughter, at home Sophie, 9 years old, waiting for him to come back from work, the way she always waited. With the TV on, and a plate covered in plastic wrap in the refrigerator, because she always made sure there was something for him to eat when he got home late. He thought about the fact that he'd told her he'd be home by 9. He pulled out his phone. Screen was cracked from the corridor. He dialed. It rang twice. "Dad?" Sophie's voice. Clear and bright and 9 years old. "You're late." "I know, Bug." His voice was rougher than usual. He cleared his throat. "I'm going to be a little later." "You okay?" "Yeah." "Are you okay? You sound weird." He looked up at the burning building. At the paramedics moving. At the fire crews and the crowd and the whole enormous mess of what this night had become. "I'm good," he said. "I'll be home." A pause. "Dad?" "Yeah, the plate in the fridge, the middle shelf." "Not the top one. The top one's for the leftovers." He almost smiled. "Got it. Okay, be careful." Always. He hung up. He was still sitting in the rain when the military vehicles arrived. Nobody expected them. The first vehicle came around the corner of Harbor Avenue and stopped at the perimeter, a dark, unmarked SUV, but the way it moved was not civilian. The way the men who got out of it moved was not civilian. They were dressed in civilian clothes, but they carried themselves with the specific, economical posture of people who have spent years moving through difficult places without wasting motion. Then came the second vehicle, and the third, and the fourth larger, a military transport with men in uniform, Marines. Not local military liaison, not a courtesy presence. Combat-capable Marines in a working deployment posture. Establishing a perimeter around the hotel with the practiced efficiency of a unit that had been briefed before they arrived. The crowd felt the shift. People moved back without being told to. Something about the energy changed the way energy changes when something that was an emergency becomes something else. A man in uniform senior rank, the bars visible on his collar, even from a distance, moved through the crowd with 2 plainclothes personnel flanking him. He moved through it the way men of authority move, not pushing, but with a certainty about direction that made the crowd part. He walked directly toward Ethan, not toward the hotel executives, not toward Victoria Reynolds, though she turned to watch, not toward the fire department commanders or the gathering police presence. He walked directly toward the man sitting alone in the rain on the wet pavement. Soaked jacket, cracked phone in his hand. He stopped 6 feet away. Then he closed the distance to 3. Ethan looked up at him. Something moved across his face, recognition, the specific kind of recognition that carries weight, that has history in it. He didn't stand up immediately. He held the eye contact for one steady moment. Then he stood. The Marine commander looked at him. The crowd had gone nearly quiet, not silent. The emergency sounds didn't stop, but the human noise, the chatter and speculation dropped as people around them registered that something was happening that they didn't understand. The commander looked at Ethan Walker, at the worn jacket, the soaked-through shoulders, the calm face that hadn't changed expression through any of it, and he came to attention. Not a casual acknowledgement, a full, formal military stance. and he said, in a voice that carried clearly through the wet Seattle night, "Captain Walker, we weren't sure we'd ever hear that emergency code activated again." The street went quiet. Victoria Reynolds stood 15 feet away, with a paramedic's blanket on her shoulders, and watched the world. She thought she understood reorganize itself around a man she had initially seen as background. Gerald Foss from Hotel Operations stopped mid-sentence and stared. The executive who had been pointing at Ethan and assigning blame lowered his arm slowly, like a man who has realized mid-gesture that he is making a terrible mistake. Ethan Walker stood in the rain, in his worn jacket, and looked at the commander. His voice when he spoke was the same voice he'd used all night, even, certain, carrying no weight of performance or drama, just the weight of fact. "Sir," he said, "we've got people who need medical attention. Building integrity is compromised on 4, and there are some things that happened in that building tonight that somebody needs to look at very carefully." The commander nodded once. "That's why we're here, Captain." And for the first time that night, Ethan Walker was talking to someone who was actually going to listen. The fire, the explosion, the woman he carried out and then went back for. The building systems that had been sabotaged by hands that knew exactly what they were doing. None of it was accident. None of it was random. And the men who'd just arrived in the rain, they knew things about Ethan Walker that the hotel executives didn't. Things that went back 8 years, to a mission that was never in any public record. In a valley that didn't officially exist, where 12 men came home because one man refused to leave any of them behind. The story of what happened inside Harborcrest Hotel was just beginning. And so was the reckoning for the people who started the fire. The commander's words hung in the wet air like something physical. "Captain Walker." 2 words, that was all. But those 2 words hit the crowd the way the explosion had hit the 4th floor, not with sound, but with force. The kind of force that moves through people before they understand why they're moving. Gerald Foss had stopped talking. The executive who'd been pointing his finger at Ethan 30 seconds ago had gone still with his arm half lowered, caught in the middle of a gesture he clearly wished he could take back. Even the paramedics nearby had paused, glancing between the Marine commander standing at attention and the man in the soaked jacket standing in front of him. Victoria Reynolds hadn't moved. She stood with the mylar blanket still on her shoulders, the bandage at her hairline, and she was watching Ethan Walker with the focused attention of someone who has just realized that every assumption they made about a person was built on nothing. Ethan looked at the commander for exactly 2 seconds. Then he turned to the practical. "The 3 I brought out are with the paramedics on the east perimeter," he said. "Reynolds has a possible shoulder fracture and a head lack. Her security chief was unconscious when I pulled him out, head wound. Possible rib fracture. The 2 procurement officers were ambulatory. You'll want to confirm their status." The commander, Colonel David Marsh. According to the nameplate, Ethan had read in the half-second when the man came to attention, nodded once to one of the plainclothes personnel flanking him. The man moved immediately toward the paramedic staging area, without a word exchanged. That was how units moved when they'd worked together long enough. No repetition, no confirmation theater, just action. "What's your read on the building?" Marsh asked. "Intentional. Somebody went through those systems with knowledge of how they worked and time to do it carefully. The suppression regulators on 4 were physically depressurized, not failed. Depressurized. Emergency lighting backup on 6 had a manually pulled fuse. Stairwell door on 5 was wedged open to change the building's airflow dynamics in an emergency. Ethan's voice was flat, and even the voice of a man delivering a report, not telling a story. The explosion originated in the corridor outside Reynolds' demonstration suite. North wall of the suite took the primary blast through the window. Whatever they used, it wasn't improvised. The pattern was too controlled for improvised. Marsh was looking at him with an expression that wasn't surprise. It was something closer to recognition, the recognition of a man hearing exactly what he expected to hear from a specific person. You flagged the systems before the event. An hour before. Hotel management declined to act. Marsh turned. His eyes found Gerald Foss in the crowd, with the precision of a man who has spent decades identifying exactly who in a room is responsible for what went wrong. Foss met his gaze for approximately 3 seconds before looking away. "We're going to need your inspection reports," Marsh said. "Everything you documented tonight. Clipboards in the maintenance corridor on 4. Ethan reached into his jacket pocket. "But I photographed everything." He held up the phone. Cracked screen, but functional. He pulled up the photos and held it out to Marsh. Time-stamped. 37 images. Starts at 1742. Marsh looked at the phone. Then he looked at Ethan. Something moved behind his eyes, not sentiment. Exactly, but something adjacent. The specific expression of a man looking at another man and thinking. "Some things don't change. Get him a secure device," he said to the second flanking officer. "And get him dry clothes. He's going to be here a while." "I need to call my daughter first," Ethan said. Marsh didn't blink. Of course. It was the most natural exchange in the middle of the most extraordinary situation. And that contrast, that absolute normalcy sitting right next to everything else, was somehow the most human thing that had happened all night. Ethan stepped to the side and dialed. It rang once. "Dad," Sophie's voice immediately alert, not sleepy. She'd been waiting. Still at the scene, bug. Going to be a couple more hours at least. "Is everything okay?" He looked at the building. At the smoke, still rising from the 4th floor. At the military vehicles and the emergency lights and the 200 people standing in the rain. "It's handled," he said. "You doing all right? I watched the news." A pause. "Dad, they're talking about a fire at the Harbor Crest. Is that where you were?" He closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. "Yeah, are you hurt?" "No, baby. I'm not hurt, okay." The word was simple and complete. The way 9-year-olds say things when they've decided to believe you and have chosen to let the believing be enough. "The casserole's on the middle shelf, not the top one." "I know. You told me, just making sure." "A beat, I love you." "Dad, I love you too. Lock the door and go to sleep. I'm already in bed." He almost said something else. He didn't. He hung up and stood for a moment in the rain with the phone in his hand. And then he put it in his pocket and turned back to Colonel Marsh and the machinery of consequence that was just beginning to spin up around the Harbor Crest Hotel. He didn't know it yet, but the next 6 hours were going to be the longest of his life. Not because of the danger was behind him, but because of what the investigation was about to uncover, and who it was going to catch, and the moment when a man who had spent 6 years being invisible was going to find himself standing in a room with no exits. His past and his present finally, irreversibly occupying the same space. But that was later. Right now, a Marine colonel was waiting for him. Ethan Walker walked back into the light. The investigators worked through the night. Ethan sat at a folding table that had been set up in the hotel's parking structure, underneath the shelter of the upper level, out of the rain. Someone had brought him a dry jacket, anonymous, dark, too big in the shoulders, and a coffee that was terrible, and that he drank in 4 long swallows without tasting it. A young Marine corporal sat across from him, with a recording device and a laptop. And Ethan walked him through everything. Twice the timeline. The observations, the conversations with hotel management. Every detail in the order it happened. The corporal was good. He didn't interrupt. He didn't lead. He asked clarifying questions at precisely the right moments. The kind of questions that told Ethan someone had briefed this young man on how to debrief someone who'd been in the field. That told him something about how seriously the military was treating what had happened in that building tonight. When they'd been through it twice, the corporal excused himself and came back 8 minutes later with Colonel Marsh. Marsh sat down across from him, set a manila folder on the table, and looked at him with the direct, undecorated eye contact of a man about to say something significant. "What I'm about to tell you carries a temporary security classification," Marsh said. "You held clearance at the TS level when you separated. That clearance is technically lapsed, but given the circumstances, We're operating on provisional need to know. You understand what that means. I understand. Victoria Reynolds' presentation tonight was not a routine technology demonstration. Marsh folded his hands on the table. Arca Defense Systems has been developing a signals detection and jamming platform specifically designed to counter the new generation of encrypted drone guidance systems. The prototype she was presenting tonight represents 7 years of development and a specific capability gap we currently have no other program to fill. If that technology had been stolen or destroyed tonight, he stopped. The implications are significant. Ethan absorbed this. You think someone was there for the technology. We think someone was there to create enough chaos to remove the technology from the demonstration area while everyone was responding to the fire and the explosion. The explosion was a distraction, not a destruction attempt. Targeted, controlled, designed to incapacitate the people in the suite without destroying the equipment. Marsh paused. The equipment is gone. It was removed from the suite during the 12 minutes between the explosion and when fire personnel reached that floor. Ethan sat with that for a moment. 12 minutes. The 12 minutes he'd spent in that building, pulling people out. Someone knew the layout, he said. Someone knew the building systems well enough to compromise them selectively. Someone knew the event schedule precisely enough to time the explosion to the exact window when Reynolds' security detail had rotated. Someone knew which ventilation shaft provided access to the suite's service alcove, the same ventilation shaft Ethan had used to get in. He felt something cold move through him that had nothing to do with the rain. You're looking at me, he said. Not an accusation. A statement. We're looking at everyone who had access to that building tonight, Marsh said. His voice was measured. Your inspection access gave you a complete map of the building systems. You were documented in the 4th floor corridor less than 40 minutes before the explosion. And I flagged the compromised items to hotel management and then tried to flag them to the fire department. You have that call on record. We have the call. Marsh's expression didn't change. The fire department log confirms the call came in 43 seconds before the alarm went off. The timing is consistent with what you described. Then why are we having this conversation? Marsh looked at him steadily. Because there are people in this investigation who are going to ask whether a man with your specific training and access could have done both things. Flagged the systems as cover and executed the operation. He let the silence sit for exactly 2 seconds. I'm telling you this because you deserve to know what you're walking into. And because I've read your file, Captain. All of it. And I don't think you did this. Ethan looked at him. The parking structure hummed with the sounds of the investigation outside vehicles. Voices, radio traffic. Somewhere above them, the building was still being worked by fire crews. But someone wants it to look like I might have, Ethan said. Gerald Foss made a formal statement to the police 40 minutes ago, Marsh said. In that statement, he described a confrontational interaction with you earlier in the evening, characterized your behavior as aggressive and erratic, and suggested that you had expressed hostility toward the hotel's management team. Ethan held very still. Then he called me aggressive. In his statement, yes, I asked him to address a safety problem and he ignored me. His voice was still flat, still even, but underneath the evenness there was something else now, not anger exactly, but the specific, cold clarity that comes when a person realizes the shape of what's happening to them. He ignored the problem. The problem happened, and now he's telling the police I was hostile. He is. What about the hotel's surveillance? The 4th floor cameras malfunctioned beginning at approximately 1700. That's 2 hours before the explosion. Marsh paused. Which is consistent with the rest of the pattern. Ethan nodded slowly. Of course it was. Whoever had done this had been thorough. And whoever had done this had looked at the building and thought, if something goes wrong, who takes the blame? And the answer had been obvious. The outside contractor, the low-level inspector, the man nobody was going to go to the mat for. Except that the man nobody was going to go to the mat for had just spent the last 2 hours proving that he knew that building better than anyone in it. You said, "You're operating on provisional need to know," Ethan said. "What do you need from me?" Marsh leaned forward slightly. "Your inspection reports establish a clear timeline of system tampering. They show that the compromises were in place before you arrived, not after. Combined with the photographic documentation and the phone records from your calls to hotel management and the fire department, we can establish with high confidence that you were responding to the situation, not creating it." But Marsh almost smiled, just the edge of one, the expression of a man who appreciated being read correctly. "But the investigation is going to take time. The people who want to point at you are motivated, and they have resources." The hotel's legal team was on site within the hour. Fosse's statement has already generated a narrative in some of the press contacts who were at the event tonight. By tomorrow morning, there will be a version of what happened that puts your name at the center of it. And the correct version requires building a complete evidentiary record, requires forensic analysis of the explosion site, requires tracing the equipment that was taken. Marsh looked at him directly. "It will take time, and in that time, there is going to be pressure. On you, on anyone who vouches for you." Ethan sat with that. He thought about Sophie at home, asleep. He thought about his truck with the cracked windshield. He thought about the 6 years of quiet, careful, invisible work that he'd built after leaving the Marines, not a life that looked impressive to anyone but him, but a life that was his, that he'd chosen deliberately, that fit the person he'd decided to become after everything that had happened. And he thought about the person who had looked at him and decided that he was the right shape for a frame. "Tell me what you need," he said. The thing about Gerald Fosse was that he was not actually a dishonest man by nature. He was a frightened one, and frightened men, Ethan had learned over 2 decades in situations where fear determined outcomes, were more dangerous than dishonest men because they were unpredictable. A dishonest man had a plan. A frightened man was improvising. Ethan learned the specifics of Fosse's statement from a federal investigator named Carla Diaz, who came to the table 40 minutes after Marsh left and sat down with a calm, unhurried manner that Ethan immediately read as formidable. Diaz was mid-40s, dark hair pulled back, the kind of woman who had clearly spent a career being underestimated by men who didn't read rooms well enough. She set a thin file on the table and looked at Ethan with eyes that were doing very fast. "Very thorough work, Mr. Walker." She left the captain off deliberately. Ethan noted establishing the civilian frame of the investigation rather than the military one. "I'm going to be direct with you. You're not under arrest. You're not currently a suspect, and you're free to have legal representation present for any conversation we have. Are you clear on that?" "I'm clear, good." She opened the file. "I want to talk to you about something," Fosse said in his statement, "that goes beyond characterizing your behavior tonight." She found the page she wanted and set it facing him on the table. He stated that you made a specific comment during your interaction with him. He claims you said, and I'm quoting from his statement, "People in buildings like this don't listen until something happens. Maybe something needs to happen." Ethan read the line. Then he looked up. "I didn't say that, you're certain?" "I'm certain. What I said was that his suppression systems would not function correctly if a fire occurred, and that a building full of guests needed those systems to function correctly. I did not make any statement that could be reasonably interpreted as a threat." His voice was level. "He is lying." Diaz looked at him for a long moment. "The challenge with that specific statement," she said, "is that the interaction was unrecorded. His account against yours, except for my written documentation, time-stamped photographs, and 2 phone calls to building security and the fire department that demonstrate I was trying to prevent something, not cause it, both of which are consistent with a sophisticated operator creating plausible deniability." She said it without apology, not because she believed it, Ethan sensed, but because she needed to put it on the table. A good investigator did that. They handed you the hardest version of the problem and watched what you did with it. "A sophisticated operator," Ethan said, who built a record of flagging the exact vulnerabilities that were then exploited, who stayed in the building after everyone else evacuated, who went back in twice, and who called the fire department from inside the building 43 seconds before the alarm went off. He paused. If I built this operation, I built a terrible cover story. Diaz almost smiled. Just the edge of it. That's actually a reasonable point. I know it is. Tell me about the ventilation shaft on 4, he told her. Everything, the shaft dimensions, why he knew them, how he'd accessed it, what he found on the other side. He told her about Victoria Reynolds and the exact sequence of how he'd gotten her out and what she'd said and what he'd said. When he finished, Diaz looked at her notes and then at him. Ms. Reynolds gave a statement, she said. I assumed she would. Her statement corroborates your account precisely. The sequence of events, the dialogue, your instruction to her at the stairwell, your decision to return to the 4th floor. She paused. She was quite specific. She's a specific person, she said. Diaz glanced at her notes. And again, I'm quoting from her statement. He gave me his name in a burning corridor because he understood that a name is something to hold on to when everything else is wrong. That's not the behavior of a person who caused what was happening. That's the behavior of someone who has done this before. Diaz looked up. She's right, isn't she? You've done this before. The parking structure was quiet for a moment. Rain on concrete above them. Different circumstances, Ethan said. Tell me, he considered. Then there was a mission. Overseas. Not something that's in any public record, and not something I can detail in the frame of this conversation. But yes, I've been in burning spaces before. I've carried people out before. The mechanics are the same, regardless of whether it's a hotel or somewhere else. You read the space, you find the people, you get them out. You don't leave without them. Diaz looked at him for a long moment. Then she wrote something in her notes and closed the file. Mr. Walker, she said, I'm going to tell you what I can at this point in the investigation. And what I can't. She folded her hands on the table. What I can tell you is that the forensic evidence from the explosion site is not consistent with improvised construction. Whoever placed that device had professional-level knowledge of controlled demolition. Your background includes demolition training from your Marine service, which is one of the reasons your name is in the conversation at all. What I cannot tell you yet is where the forensic trail leads. Because we are 6 hours into an investigation that is going to take considerably longer than that. I understand. What I can also tell you is that Victoria Reynolds has already spoken to our supervisory team tonight. She made it clear that she intends to be an active participant in this investigation and that she has concerns about the framing of your role that she considers her personal responsibility to address. Diaz stood, picked up her file. Whatever she decides to do with that, it's outside my lane, but I thought you should know. She left. Ethan sat alone at the folding table for a long moment. Victoria Reynolds. He kept coming back to that. The woman he'd carried out of a burning room, who'd looked at him in a smoke-filled stairwell and said, "Come back," not as a command, not as a plea, but as a simple expression of expectation. The way you say "come back" to someone you've already decided matters was now. Apparently, fighting for him. In a room somewhere else in this parking structure, or in one of those parked vehicles. Fighting for a man she'd known for approximately 45 minutes in a building that was on fire. He didn't know what to do with that. He knew how to carry people. He knew how to read a building. He knew how to stay calm in a space that was collapsing around him. Those were things he'd learned and practiced and used until they were part of him. He didn't know how to let someone fight for him. That was a skill he'd never had occasion to develop. The corporal came back with more terrible coffee. Ethan drank it. The dawn came quietly, the way Seattle dawns do, not dramatically. Just a gradual graying of the dark until you realize the night is gone and the city is back. By 6 in the morning, Ethan had been in the parking structure for 7 hours. He'd given 2 full recorded statements, reviewed and approved the transcriptions of his inspection reports that the corporal had compiled from his photographs, and spent 40 minutes on a secure call with a JAG attorney that Marsh had arranged, not because Ethan was in legal jeopardy, the attorney made clear, but because people were going to be looking at him, and he needed someone looking back. At 6:15, Colonel Marsh came back to the table with the expression of a man who has news and has decided that the person receiving it deserves to hear it without preamble. "We found the equipment," he said. Ethan looked up sharply. It was in a vehicle in the parking garage 2 blocks from the hotel. The vehicle was registered to a shell company that traces back preliminarily, and this is still developing to a logistics contractor that does business with 3 of the hotel's corporate event management partners. Marsh paused. One of those partners is a company connected to a senior executive at the hotel. Ethan sat with that for exactly 3 seconds. "Foss," he said. Marsh didn't confirm, but he also didn't not confirm. What he did was set a photograph on the table surveillance photo. Low resolution, time-stamped at 1847. Which was 12 minutes after the explosion. A man in a hotel uniform moving through the parking garage adjacent to the hotel, carrying a case that was the approximate dimensions of the equipment Ethan had seen in the demonstration suite. The man was not Fossey. The man was someone Ethan didn't recognize. Younger, moving with the careful precision of a person who is trying to look unhurried while moving as fast as they can. "The uniform," Ethan said. "Hotel maintenance. We're working on identification." "The case," Ethan said. "That's a Pelican hard case. You can see the handle shape. Standard transport case for high-sensitivity electronics." He looked up. Reynolds would know the exact model her equipment was stored in. She already identified it. 20 minutes ago. Marsh picked the photo up. "The man who dismissed your concerns about those systems this evening. Gerald Foss. He's been in interview for the last 3 hours. Is he talking?" "He is now." Marsh looked at him steadily. He spent the first 2 hours insisting that everything he'd told the police was accurate. That you were hostile, that the interaction was confrontational, that you made threatening statements. A pause. He spent the last hour telling a different story entirely. Ethan felt something shift in his chest. Not relief exactly. Something more complicated, the particular feeling of a man who has spent years knowing how people like Fossey operated. Knowing that when the pressure came, they would find a way to put someone else in front of it. Knowing that he was the someone they'd chosen, and now watching the machinery of consequence finally catching up. "Who gave him the access?" Ethan said. He's pointing upward. His statement indicates that instructions came from above his level. He's been told his cooperation will be considered. So he's cooperating. Marsh sat down across from him for the first time that morning. The picture that's forming is not simple. This was not a group of opportunistic thieves. The people who planned this had access to ARCA's internal development timeline. They knew Reynolds' presentation schedule months in advance, and they had enough knowledge of the building systems and event logistics to construct an operation that should have worked. He paused. "The one thing they didn't account for was you." Ethan said nothing. "A contract safety inspector," Marsh continued, "who just happened to have the training to read the tampering for what it was. The knowledge of the building, to navigate it under emergency conditions. And he paused. The character to go back in twice. He looked at Ethan directly. They built a plan that accounted for every moving part in that building, except the one they decided wasn't worth accounting for. The man in the old jacket with the toolbox. The man nobody noticed. Ethan looked at the table. He thought about the moment in the 4th floor corridor when he'd stood outside the ventilation panel and made a list of what he was seeing. The small details that shouldn't have been there. The thing that was wrong before anything was obviously wrong. He'd seen it because he'd learned to see it, and he'd learned to see it because years ago, in a different place, and under different stakes, not seeing it had cost people their lives. He hadn't been in that building as a hero. He'd been there as a safety inspector, doing a job he'd built carefully and quietly out of the pieces of a life that had gone through things most people didn't talk about. He was there because the work mattered to him, because making sure a building full of strangers was safe mattered to him, because Sophie's dad came home at the end of the shift. That was all it was supposed to be. He looked up at Marsh. What happens next? The investigation continues. The evidence we have is strong but incomplete. We're going to need your cooperation over the next several weeks, possibly longer. Your documentation will be central to the prosecution case. Marsh met his eyes. And the people who tried to put you in the middle of this are going to have lawyers who are going to make your life uncomfortable. I know how that works. I imagine you do. Marsh stood. There's someone who wants to speak with you. I told her I'd ask first. Ethan already knew who it was. Send her in. Victoria Reynolds walked into the parking structure with the deliberate, measured pace of a woman whose body was telling her it had been through something significant and who was overriding it entirely on will. The bandage at her hairline was white against her skin. Her right arm was in a sling. The shoulder had been confirmed as dislocated. Relocated at the hospital, still painful. She was wearing someone else's jacket over a hospital gown. And she hadn't slept, and she was carrying a cup of coffee that she held in her left hand, with the careful attention you give to something that might be the only thing keeping you functional. She sat down across from him. They looked at each other for a moment. The two of them, the parking structure around them quiet for once. No investigators, no military personnel within earshot. Just the sound of the city coming awake outside. How's your shoulder? He asked. Hurts. She said it without complaint. A statement of fact. How are you? I'm fine. She looked at him with the expression of someone who has spent a career reading people and has decided to apply that skill to him. You went back in twice, she said. There were people up there. You didn't know that for certain. I knew there should have been. He met her eyes. Your security chief. The two procurement officers. They were in that suite. I knew someone had to go look. Most people wouldn't have gone once, she said. Let alone twice. He didn't have an answer for that. Not one that would make sense to someone who hadn't spent years understanding that when everyone else runs from something, someone has to run toward it, not because they're braver, not because they don't feel what everyone else feels, but because they've made the decision, at some earlier point, that their capacity to help obligates them to help. It's not heroism. It's accounting. You have what it takes to do this. Other people don't. Therefore you go. I heard what they were saying about you, Victoria said. She set her coffee down. Foss the hotel executives. Before the Marines arrived, I heard what they were building. Her jaw tightened slightly. I want you to know that I made clear to every investigator I spoke with tonight what I saw. What you did, and what the timeline was. She paused. I'm sorry it's necessary. It's not your fault I dismissed you, she said. The words came out with a directness that told him she'd been holding them, had decided to say them, and was now saying them the way she did most things without decoration. Earlier tonight, when you were flagging the problems, you spoke to hotel management. I was present for part of that. I saw a contractor with a clipboard and she stopped. I made a judgment based on how you looked and not on what you were saying. And that was wrong. Ethan looked at her. You didn't know me. That's not an excuse. No, he agreed. But it's a reason. He picked up his coffee. People make judgments on limited information. You had 30 seconds of observing a man in an old jacket talking to a hotel manager about suppression systems during an event you'd spent months preparing for. You had about 100 other things to think about. He paused. You don't owe me an apology for that. I'm giving you one anyway. He looked at her for a moment. Accept it, he said. She picked her coffee back up. Outside, the city was fully awake now, traffic, voices, the ordinary sound of Seattle at 7 in the morning. Entirely indifferent to the fact that 12 hours ago a building 2 blocks from here had been the site of something that could have killed a lot of people. I want to talk to you about something, Victoria said. Not today. In a few days when you've had time to sleep, and the immediate investigation has settled. But I want you to know that I intend to have that conversation. What kind of conversation? She looked at him steadily. The kind where I offer you something, and you tell me whether you want it. She paused. I've spent 20 years building Arca. I have 240 employees. I have facilities in 4 states and contracts that depend on the security and integrity of everything we build. Another pause. Last night, someone got close enough to my operation to almost take the most important thing we've ever developed. And the reason they failed was not my security team, not the military presence at the event, and not the hotel's own systems. She held his eyes. It was you, a contract building inspector with a worn jacket and a clipboard. And I'd like to not be in the position again where the safety of what I've built depends on luck. Ethan said nothing. Think about it, she said. He looked at her, the woman who had been on the floor of a burning room 8 hours ago, who had told him come back in a smoky stairwell, who had fought for him in front of investigators while her arm was in a sling. He looked at her, and he thought about Sophie's casserole on the middle shelf and the cracked windshield on his truck sec and the 6 years of quiet work that had led to this morning. I'll think about it, he said. She nodded. She stood, picked up her coffee, and stopped. Walker. He looked up. She was looking at him with something in her expression that had moved past gratitude into something more honest than the expression of a person who has looked at others and understood something fundamental about them that they hadn't expected to understand. Your daughter, she said. Is she proud of you? He thought about that. She doesn't know most of it, he said. The military stuff. Most of what happened before. She knows I go to work and I come home. He paused. She keeps the casserole on the middle shelf. Victoria Reynolds looked at him for a long moment. She sounds like someone who knows exactly who her father is, she said. Then she walked out of the parking structure and back into the morning. And Ethan Walker sat alone at the folding table with cold coffee and 37 time-stamped photographs on a cracked phone and the quiet, settling knowledge that the night was over and he was still here. And somewhere across the city, a 9-year-old girl was waking up to find the middle shelf of the refrigerator untouched. He got up. He found the corporal. I need a ride to my truck, he said. He was going home. He got home at 7:42 in the morning. Sophie was at the kitchen table in her school clothes, backpack already on, eating cereal with the focused efficiency of a 9-year-old who had decided that being ready early was her contribution to whatever was happening. She looked up when he came through the door, and the thing that happened in her face the instant, complete relief, hit him harder than anything that had happened in the last 14 hours. She didn't run to him. She put her spoon down carefully, pushed back her chair, and walked across the kitchen and put both arms around his waist and held on. He put his hand on the back of her head and held her there for a long moment, standing in his own kitchen in the borrowed jacket that was too big in the shoulders, smelling like smoke and rain and a building that had nearly killed several people the night before. The casserole's still on the middle shelf, she said, her voice muffled against his jacket. I see that. He looked over her head at the refrigerator. The plate was exactly where she said it would be, covered in plastic wrap. Waiting. I'll eat it. Give me 5 minutes. She leaned back and looked at him the way she looked at him, sometimes the way that reminded him that whatever she'd gotten from her mother and whatever she'd gotten from him had combined into something that was entirely its own person, sharp and watchful and capable of seeing things adults didn't always see in each other. She looked at him and she said, You went back in, didn't you? It wasn't a question. The news said someone went back in twice, she said. I knew it was you. He looked at her for a moment. Then, yeah, I did. She held his eyes for exactly the length of time it took her to make a decision. Then she nodded, once, the way he nodded when something was settled, and went back to her cereal. Eat your casserole, she said. You look terrible. He almost laughed. He heated the casserole. He ate it standing at the counter because sitting down felt like a commitment he wasn't sure his body would let him walk back from. It was chicken and rice, the kind she made from a recipe card that had belonged to his mother. And it was exactly what it needed to be. He drove Sophie to school at 8:15. She got out at the curb, hitched her backpack up on her shoulders, and turned back to the window. "Dad," she said. "Yeah, the people you went back in for. Are they okay?" He looked at her. "Yeah, baby. They're okay." She nodded. Turned. Walked into the school without looking back. Because she was 9, and she'd been raised by a man who had taught her, without ever saying it directly, that you don't look back once you've made sure the thing you were worried about is handled. He sat in the truck for a moment after she disappeared through the doors. The cracked windshield, the radio that only worked on 2 stations, the coffee cup in the holder from 3 days ago. His phone buzzed. "Unknown number," he answered. "Mr. Walker." A man's voice. Smooth, practiced. The voice of someone who had spent a career on phones. "My name is Richard Calloway. I'm an attorney representing the Harbor Crest Hotel Group and Gerald Foss personally. I'm reaching out as a courtesy, before things move into a more formal phase, to discuss the events of last night and whether there might be a path to resolving this situation that works for everyone involved." Ethan sat very still. "What situation are you referring to?" he asked. A pause. "The investigation, Mr. Walker. The various statements that were made in the immediate aftermath of a very stressful event. My clients are prepared to acknowledge that emotions ran high last night and that some characterizations may have been imprecise. In the spirit of, your client told investigators, I made a threatening statement," Ethan said. He stated that I said, "Maybe something needs to happen." That was a lie, Mr. Walker. The situation is more nuanced than, he lied to the police during a federal investigation. That's not nuance. That's perjury. His voice was still even. Still flat. "I'm going to give you one piece of information, and then I'm going to hang up. The investigation has located the missing equipment and has preliminary forensic evidence connecting its removal to parties associated with your client's organization. I know this because I was told this at 6 this morning by a federal investigator. So whatever your client told you about how this was going to go, he's been lying to you too." He paused. "Have a good morning." He hung up. He sat in the truck for another moment. Then he drove home and slept for 4 hours, which was 4 hours less than he needed and 4 more than he expected. He woke up at 1 in the afternoon to 17 missed calls. 6 from numbers he didn't recognize. 4 from his contracting company's operations manager, a man named Doug Heller, who had left messages in increasing states of agitation. 2 from the Jaggy attorney Marsh had arranged. 1 from a number with a Washington, D.C. area code that had left no message. 1 from Colonel Marsh himself. 1 from a number he didn't recognize that had left a message in a woman's voice, clear. "Direct, no wasted words, Mr. Walker. This is Carla Diaz. We need you to come in this afternoon. There's been a development. Please call back as soon as you get this." And the 17th call, which had come in 12 minutes ago, was from Victoria Reynolds. He listened to her message last. Her voice was different from the parking structure. Still controlled, still deliberate, but underneath the control, there was something tighter. Something that had happened since 7 in the morning had changed the quality of her composure. "Walker, it's Victoria Reynolds. I need you to know that something has come out in the last 2 hours that directly affects you. I'm not going to leave the details on a voicemail. Call me back, please." He called Diaz first. She answered on the first ring. "Thank you for calling back. How soon can you be here?" "An hour, good. And Walker, don't talk to anyone between now and when you get here. If the hotel's attorney calls, he already called." A pause. "What did you say?" "I told him I knew about the equipment and I hung up." A longer pause. Then, in a voice that had a different quality than any tone she'd used with him the night before, "Okay, that's okay. Come in." He was in the car with his keys in the ignition when it occurred to him to call Victoria back. She answered, before the first ring finished. Walker, the relief in her voice when she said his name was immediate and unguarded, and told him more than she'd intended to tell him. "What happened?" he said. "Someone talked to the press." She said it cleanly. "No hedging. There's a story running on 2 news channels right now. It identifies you by name. It describes you as a person of interest in the investigation into last night's incident. It includes a brief pause. It includes personal information. Your address, Sophie's school, your previous military service. Framed in a way that she stopped. Walker, they're trying to bury you in public before the evidence can clear you. Whoever is running the legal strategy for the people who did this, they've decided that destroying your credibility now is worth more than anything they might lose in court later. Ethan's hand tightened on the steering wheel. His address, Sophie's school. Where is this running? His voice had a different quality now, too. Still controlled, but something underneath it had hardened into something that was not quite anger, but was anger's more focused cousin. Channel 4 and a digital outlet called Northwest Current. The Channel 4 piece cites an anonymous source described as a senior hotel official. The digital piece cites two sources. One of them. She paused again. One of them appears to have access to your military records. Specifically to the details of your separation from the Marines. Details about why you left. The kitchen. Sophie at the table. Her father had left the Marines to raise her after her mother died. A private decision made in the worst year of his life. A choice he'd made with everything he had and had never once regretted. A choice that was his, that was Sophie's, that belonged to no news story and no investigation and no attorney trying to manage a narrative. Where are you? He asked. My office. Downtown. I've had my communications team monitoring since 6 a.m. A beat. Walker, I want to help with this. I have resources and I intend to use them. But I need to know, is there anything in your military record that they can use? Anything that, taken out of context, looks like something it isn't. He sat with that question for 3 seconds. There's a mission, he said. It's classified. But it's the kind of classified that, if someone leaks the right parts, strips the context, and looks a specific way. What way? He thought about how to say it. I was involved in an extraction operation that resulted in a building fire. 3 years before I separated. The fire was intentional. We used it as cover for an extraction. Nobody died. The mission was successful. But taken out of context, a former Marine who was involved in a deliberate building fire is not a narrative that looks good standing next to a building fire that someone wants to pin on a former Marine. Silence on Victoria's end. Then who knows about this mission? Colonel Marsh. And whoever else at that level has my full file. Is Marsh trustworthy? Yes. Then call him before you come in, she said. Right now. Before the classified details get managed by someone who isn't Marsh. He was already dialing before she finished the sentence. Marsh answered in 2 rings. I saw the coverage. There's a classified operation in my record, Ethan said. 3 years before separation. Extraction with deliberate fire use. If someone is pulling from my file, I know the mission, Marsh said. And yes, I've already flagged it. The details of that operation are sealed, and they stay sealed. If someone is accessing your military record without authorization, that's a federal matter on top of the existing federal matters. And it is being treated as such right now. His voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it, a coldness that Ethan recognized from men who have decided that something has gone too far. Who called you this morning? Attorney named Calloway. Representing the hotel group and Fosse personally. Did you tell him about the equipment? Yes. A beat. Good, we wanted them to know we had it. He paused. Ethan, the people who are running the public narrative right now are scared. The equipment was found faster than they planned. Fosse is talking. The forensic trail is moving in a direction they can't control. So they're trying to burn you in public before the evidence clears you in court. Because destroying someone's reputation takes 48 hours and restoring it takes years. He paused. But here's what they don't know. What? Diaz is ready to move. We've had the building from them since this morning. We have the preliminary forensic report from the explosion site. We have Fosse's statement. And 2 hours ago, we identified the man in the parking garage. Marsh's voice was steady. His name is Derek Solis, former private military contractor. 2 prior federal charges, both dismissed on procedural grounds. He worked for a security consulting company that contracted with. Marsh paused precisely. That contracted with one of the hotel's event management partners. A company that is owned, through 3 layers of shell entities, by a man named Warren Castillo. Ethan didn't know that name. Who is Warren Castillo? Former board member of Arca Defense Systems, Marsh said. He was removed 18 months ago, after Reynolds discovered that he had been sharing proprietary development timelines with a competing firm. She forced him off the board and threatened civil litigation. He settled. He signed an NDA. And he has spent the last 18 months building an operation designed to take from her the one thing she hadn't finished developing when he left. The room went quiet in Ethan's head, the way rooms go quiet when a thing that was complicated suddenly becomes simple. Everything connecting. The carefully compromised building systems. The timed explosion. The stolen equipment. The frame for the building inspector who had gotten too close to the truth too soon. Castillo hadn't wanted to destroy Arca's technology. He'd wanted to own it, and Gerald Fossey frightened. Improvising Gerald Foss had been the inside man who'd been either recruited or coerced, getting access to the building's systems under the cover of a routine maintenance cycle. Does Reynolds know about Castillo? Ethan asked. She does now. About 20 minutes ago. A pause. She did not take it well. He could imagine what Victoria Reynolds looked like 20 minutes ago. Learning that the man who had nearly killed her and stolen everything she'd spent 7 years building was someone she had once sat in boardrooms with. Someone she had trusted with the architecture of her company's future. That kind of betrayal had a specific weight to it. He knew the weight. What do you need from me? He asked. Get to Diaz. She's ready to make arrests. She needs your documented timeline as part of the formal arrest record. Your inspection reports are the evidentiary backbone of the timeline. A beat. And Walker, whatever is running on the news right now. It's going to get louder before it gets quieter. Be ready for that. I know. Your daughter. If she's at school, I'll handle it. He hung up. He sat for exactly 30 seconds. Then he did something he rarely did in the middle of a situation. He let himself feel it for 30 full seconds. The anger at the news coverage. The cold fury at his address being printed somewhere. At Sophie's school being mentioned. At the way someone had looked at his life and decided that the parts of it that hurt the most, his wife's death, his decision to leave the Marines, the quiet years of starting over, were raw material for a story designed to destroy him. 30 seconds. He breathed. He felt it. Then he put the truck in gear and drove. Carla Diaz met him in the lobby of the federal building with the focused energy of someone operating at the specific frequency that happens when an investigation reaches its final hours before it becomes action. She walked him directly into a conference room. Marsh was on a video screen at the end of the table. 2 other federal agents were present. On the table was a printed timeline, his timeline, built from his photographs and reports and phone records, combined with the forensic data and Fossey's statement and the surveillance photo, and what they now knew about Solis and Castillo. Here's where we are, Diaz said, without preamble. We have an arrest warrant for Derek Solis, who we have in custody as of 40 minutes ago. We have a search warrant executing right now on 3 properties connected to Castillo's shell companies. We are preparing a warrant for Castillo himself, which we expect to execute by end of day. She looked at Ethan. Fossey's attorney called us 45 minutes ago. Fossey wants to recant the statement he made to the police last night and replace it with a full cooperation agreement. He wants immunity, Ethan said. He wants a deal. He's not going to get immunity, but he's going to get considered if his cooperation is complete and accurate. She held his eyes. The statement he made about you, the alleged threatening comment, he's prepared to withdraw that and provide an accurate account of your interaction with him. Something loosened in Ethan's chest. Something he'd been carrying since the parking structure. Since the moment Marsh told him what Fossey had said to the police. Since the moment he'd understood what had been built around him, and by whom, and why. Not gone, but loosened. The press coverage, he said. Diaz's expression shifted slightly. That's more complicated. They mentioned my address. My daughter's school. I know. We're treating the leak of your personal information as a separate matter. The press outlets themselves acted within legal parameters. They received information and reported it. But the source of that information accessed records they shouldn't have been able to access. And that's under investigation. My daughter is 9 years old, he said. The two other agents in the room, who had been maintaining the careful professional neutrality of people trained to listen without reacting, both moved, barely perceptibly, but Ethan saw it. Because you always see the moment when something lands in a room. I understand, Diaz said, and the way she said it quiet. Direct, no cushioning, told him she did understand, and that it mattered to her as something more than a procedural concern. We're going to move as fast as we can on the source, and we're looking at options to push back on the coverage. Victoria Reynolds is pushing back on the coverage, he said. Diaz looked at him. I know. She's been on the phone with the news director at Channel 4 since 9 this morning. She's compelling. I imagine she is. The story is going to shift, Diaz said. Once the arrests happen, the narrative changes. Quickly. That's why Castillo's people moved to push coverage. This morning, they knew if they didn't establish your name as the story before we moved, they'd lose the window entirely. She paused. They were right about the window. They were wrong about how fast we'd move. He sat with that. Then, something occurred to him that had been sitting at the edge of his mind since Marsh had given him Castillo's name. The technology, he said. The signals platform Reynolds was presenting. Solis had it in that parking garage. You said you found it. Is it intact? Diaz looked at him steadily. Yes. Then Castillo never actually got it. Correct. But he knows you have it, Ethan said. And he knows Solis is in custody. And he knows Fossey is talking. He looked at Diaz. So between this morning, when his attorney called me, and now, when you're preparing his arrest warrant, what has Castillo been doing? Diaz and Marsh exchanged a look on the video screen. We've had eyes on him, Marsh said. He's been in his office in Bellevue since 7 this morning. 4 calls out, 2 calls in. His attorney arrived at 8:30. Is he a flight risk? We're treating him as one. Diaz stood up. Which is why we're moving on the warrant today and not tomorrow. She looked at him. Walker, I need your formal signed statement confirming the inspection timeline, and then I need you to stay available by phone. The rest of this is not your job. You've given us everything we needed. He understood the dismissal. He'd been the outside man for 12 hours, the civilian who'd walked into the middle of an operation and been the thing that saved it from working. That part was done. The investigation's machinery had taken over, and his role in it was now evidentiary rather than active. He understood that. He accepted it. He gave the signed statement in 40 minutes. He shook Diaz's hand. He nodded at Marsh on the screen. And then he walked out of the federal building into the afternoon, Seattle sun, sharp and cold and clean, and stood on the sidewalk with his hands in his pockets and felt the particular quiet of a man who has been at the center of something enormous and has just stepped out of it. His phone rang. Doug Heller, his operations manager. The 4th call, he answered. Ethan. Doug's voice was strained. I've been trying to reach you all morning. I need to talk to you about, look. I got a call this morning. From the hotel's legal team. They're threatening to file a complaint against your contractor's license unless we voluntarily, Doug, terminate your contract and provide a statement confirming, Doug. His voice was quiet and very clear. The hotel's legal team is operating as part of a strategy for people who are being arrested as we speak. Gerald Foss is cooperating with federal investigators. The equipment stolen from the event last night has been recovered. The perpetrators are identified. By tomorrow morning, the story on Channel 4 is going to be very different from the story that's running right now. Silence. Are you serious? Doug's voice was hushed. I would not tell you this if I wasn't certain. Do not take any action in response to the hotel's legal team. Do not respond to their calls. Refer them to the JAG attorney, whose number I'm going to text you in the next 5 minutes. He paused. And Doug? The inspection reports I filed last night? Keep copies of everything. Certified copies. They're going to be asked for officially, and I want them in order. Ethan, the news this morning. They said you were. I know what they said. His voice stayed even. It's not accurate. Give it 24 hours. He hung up. He texted the attorney's number. He stood on the sidewalk for another moment. Then he did what he did. He got in his truck. He drove across the city. He parked on the street outside Sophie's elementary school 45 minutes before dismissal and went inside and told the front office that he was picking Sophie up early and to please make sure. Nobody else was authorized to take her anywhere today. The office manager looked at him with the alert, assessing look of someone whose job was to take exactly that kind of request seriously. Of course, Mr. Walker. Is everything okay? It will be, he said. It just needs to be today. Sophie came out of her classroom with her backpack and her coat and the expression of a 9-year-old who knows something is happening but hasn't decided yet whether to be worried. She looked at him. He looked at her. Early pickup, she said. Yeah. She fell into step beside him. They walked out to the truck. She got in, settled her backpack between her feet. He pulled out of the school parking lot and drove without any particular destination, just moving. The way you move when stillness feels like something you're not ready for yet. After 3 blocks, Sophie said, Is it because of last night? Yeah. Are you in trouble? He thought about how to answer that. He thought about it carefully, the way he thought about most things he said to her, not as a parent managing information, but as a person who believed she deserved accurate information delivered in a way she could hold. People said some things that weren't true, he said. They said them publicly. That's uncomfortable. But the people who are supposed to sort out what's true and what isn't are doing their jobs, and what's true is going to come out. He glanced at her. I'm not in trouble. I'm in the middle of the part where the truth is still being sorted out. Sophie considered this with the seriousness she brought to things that mattered. How long does that take? Not long now. She nodded. Okay. A pause. Can we get something to eat? He almost laughed. He pulled into the first diner he saw. They sat across from each other in a booth. Sophie, with a grilled cheese that she was eating with structural precision. Ethan with coffee he was actually tasting this time. The diner was warm and loud with the ordinary noise of lunch business, and they were 2 people in a booth and nobody in the place had any idea who either of them was. Ethan sat back and looked at his daughter and felt something he couldn't entirely name, not relief. Not happiness, not even the satisfaction of a thing resolved, because the thing wasn't fully resolved yet. Something more fundamental. The feeling of looking at the specific thing you decided, when everything else was uncertain, that you were going to come home for. The thing that made the word home mean something. Sophie looked up from her grilled cheese. What? Nothing. He drank his coffee. Eat your lunch. She ate her lunch. He drank his coffee. His phone buzzed on the table. He looked at the screen. Victoria Reynolds. He picked it up. Reynolds. Castillo just lawyered up. Her voice was tight. His attorney issued a statement 20 minutes ago. They're claiming the whole operation was a competitor intelligence gathering exercise that stayed within legal parameters. They're going to fight the warrant. They'll lose. I know they'll lose. But losing takes time. A beat. How are you doing? He looked across the table at Sophie, who was carefully separating the crusts from her grilled cheese in the way she always did. Eating the crusts first. I'm at a diner, he said. My daughter is eating a grilled cheese. A pause on Victoria's end. Something in the quality of the silence shifted. Good, she said. And the single word had so much in it acknowledgement. Relief. Something that was almost tenderness that it landed differently than anything she'd said in the parking structure, or the diner, or any of the formal interviews. Walker. The Channel 4 story is being pulled. I spoke to the news director personally. They are issuing a correction, and the piece is coming down within the hour. He sat with that for a second. How did you manage that? I told them the truth, and I told them what the legal implications of continuing to run an inaccurate story would be once the arrests were public. A pause. And I may have told the news director that a source with personal access to everything that happened last night was available for an exclusive interview the moment the investigation cleared the public statement. She paused. That source being me. You traded an interview for the correction. I traded an accurate interview for an inaccurate one. Her voice was dry and precise. I consider that a fair exchange. Ethan looked at Sophie. Sophie looked at him over her grilled cheese. Who is that? She asked. Not quietly, the way 9-year-olds ask things in the middle of other people's phone calls. Someone from work, he said. Is it the lady from the building? He blinked. Sophie looked at him with complete composure. The news showed your picture this morning, before I went to school. They said you carried someone out. I figured she'd call. He stared at his daughter for a moment. He put the phone back to his ear. Reynolds. I'll call you back, of course. A pause. Tell her you did good. He hung up. Sophie had gone back to her grilled cheese. She was pulling at the cheese that had melted out onto the plate, winding it around her finger in the specific unconscious way she'd been doing since she was 4 years old. She says I did good, he said. Sophie looked up. She's right. She ate the cheese off her finger. You always do good, Dad. He sat across from his daughter in a diner booth, in the middle of a Tuesday. The city moving outside the window, the investigation wrapping itself around the people who had earned it. The truth settling into its correct shape, and the story of the last 18 hours beginning the long, complicated process of being understood correctly. He reached across the table and stole one of her crusts. Hey, she said. Tax, he said. She rolled her eyes with the theatrical exhaustion of a child who has been dealing with this particular behavior for years. And then she pushed the rest of the crusts toward him. Because she always gave him the crusts. She always had. And for a few minutes, in that diner, with the phone quiet and the city outside and the smell of coffee and the sound of his daughter eating her grilled cheese, Ethan Walker sat in the eye of something enormous and let himself simply be still. He was still there when his phone lit up with a message from Diaz. 4 words, warrant executed. Castillo in custody. He read it. He set the phone face down on the table. He picked up his coffee. Ready to go? Sophie asked. 5 more minutes, he said. She ordered a milkshake. Warren Castillo was arrested at 4:17 in the afternoon. In the lobby of his company's Bellevue office, in front of 11 employees and a receptionist who later told investigators she had never seen a man's face change so completely in the space of 3 seconds. Ethan was not there for the arrest. He was at home. Sophie had homework spread across the kitchen table. A math worksheet she was working through with the systematic focus she brought to things she found genuinely interesting. He was making dinner, actual dinner, not reheated casserole. The kind where you stand at the stove and chop things, and the kitchen smells like something real. Diaz texted him the confirmation at 4:19. 2 sentences. Castillo in custody, no incident. Solis confirmed full cooperation in exchange for reduced charges. He put the phone face down on the counter and kept chopping. Sophie looked up from her worksheet. Good news? Progress, he said. She looked at him for 1 second with those sharp eyes. Then she went back to her math. She trusted the word progress. She'd learned it from him, the understanding that things didn't resolve all at once, that they moved in stages. That progress was the honest word when resolved was not yet accurate. He made pasta. He made it from scratch because it was Tuesday, and Sophie had a theory that scratch pasta on Tuesdays was the best version of Tuesday. He couldn't argue with the theory. It had held up empirically. They ate at the kitchen table. She told him about a disagreement she'd had at school with a girl in her class about whether a particular historical figure had made a good decision under the circumstances. And she argued her position with the kind of structured logic that made him privately proud in the way parents are proud of things their children don't know they're watching. He pushed back on two of her points because she was right, but she was right in a way that needed sharpening. And she pushed back on his pushback, and they went 3 rounds before she landed a counter-argument that he genuinely didn't have an answer for. "Okay," he said. "That's a good point." She allowed herself one small smile. "I know. After dinner, after Sophie was in bed, after the kitchen was clean, and the house was quiet." Ethan sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water and his phone and let the day settle. His JAG attorney had called at 5:30 with a summary of where things stood legally. Fosse's corrected statement had been formally filed. The threatening quote, "the lie," was officially withdrawn and replaced with an accurate account. Calloway, the hotel's attorney, had stopped calling. The Channel 4 correction had run at 6 o'clock. A 60-second segment that was quieter and less prominent than the original story, but that said the words that needed to be said. The earlier report had been based on inaccurate information from a source with an interest in the outcome. And Ethan Walker was not a person of interest in the investigation. 60 seconds to correct what had been built against him. He didn't spend time on the bitterness of that ratio. It was the nature of the thing. He knew it going in. He knew it now. The math didn't change just because you understood it. What he spent time on, sitting alone in his kitchen at 8:30 at night, was the question he hadn't let himself fully hold until now. The question that Victoria Reynolds had put on the table in the parking structure carefully, professionally, with the specific timing of a person who understood that there was a moment to say something and a moment to let it wait. She wanted to talk to him about a role. Safety operations, she'd said. Not a request, not a job posting. A conversation that hadn't happened yet, that she'd been clear she intended to have. He sat with it. His phone rang at 8:42. He looked at the screen. "Reynolds," he answered. "I figured you'd be up," she said. "Sophie's in bed," he said. "I'm at the kitchen table." A pause. "How is she?" "Good. She argued me into a corner about James Madison over pasta." He heard something in Victoria's voice that might have been a laugh brief. Real unguarded in a way that her public voice never was. "Smart kid, getting smarter." "Walker." Her voice shifted. Not colder, more direct. The shift of a person moving from genuine warmth into something that was also genuine, but required a different kind of precision. "I want to have that conversation now. If you're ready." He looked at the kitchen. At the clean counter. At the pasta maker on the shelf that had been his mother's. At the homework worksheet Sophie had left on the table. Folded in half, done, written across the top in her handwriting. "Go ahead," he said. "What I'm going to offer you," Victoria said, "is not a courtesy, it's not gratitude dressed up as a job. I want you to understand that, before I say anything else. Because I think you're the kind of person who needs to know the difference." A pause. "What I'm offering you is something I need, and something I believe you are, specifically, uniquely qualified to do. I'm listening. ARCA's head of safety and security operations position has been vacant for 8 months. The man who held it previously was good at the job. He was trained in corporate security protocols, had a strong background in physical security. Knew the industry. What he didn't have," she paused. What he didn't have was the ability to look at a building full of moving parts and human behavior and compromised systems and understand what was wrong before it became catastrophic. Another pause. "You do." He said nothing. "The salary is $240,000 to start," she said. "Full benefits. Relocation assistance, if you wanted to move closer to the ARCA campus in Redmond. Though that's not required, we have remote infrastructure. You would have full authority over safety protocols across all facilities. You would build the team you want." She paused. "And you would have a schedule built around the fact that you have a daughter in school." He sat very still. $240,000 was 5 times what he made as a contract safety inspector in a good year. It was the kind of number that changed things, not who he was. Not what mattered, but the practical texture of his and Sophie's life in ways that he'd spent 6 years quietly managing around. The truck with the cracked windshield. The conversations with himself about whether the timing was right to replace the water heater. I have conditions, he said. I expected you would. I won't sacrifice the schedule. Not for any event, any crisis, any circumstance that isn't a genuine emergency. If Sophie has a school thing at 2 on a Wednesday, I'm at the school thing. Agreed. I won't operate in a structure where I report my findings through management layers that can dismiss them. What happened at Harbor Crest happened because the person with the information couldn't get it to the level of authority that could act on it. If I flag something, it goes directly to you. A pause. Longer than the previous ones. That's a significant structural change. I know. I'll make it work, she said. And I won't be used as a public story, he said. Whatever is written about last night, whatever press Arca puts out, I'm not the narrative. The work is the work. I don't want a profile. I don't want a press statement with my name on it. I want to do the job. The pause this time was different. It had a quality he couldn't fully read, not hesitation, not resistance, something more like recognition. Agreed, she said. All three. A beat. Walker, can I tell you something that I said to an investigator this morning? Something I didn't plan to say, but said anyway? Yes, they asked me to describe the moment I understood what was happening in that corridor. When you had your arm around me, and we were moving toward the stairwell, and the ceiling tiles were giving. They wanted to know what I was thinking about. She paused. I told them I wasn't thinking about the company. I wasn't thinking about the prototype. I was thinking about the fact that the man who had hold of me was completely calm. And that calm, she stopped. That calm was the most extraordinary thing I had ever been that close to in 30 years of building something under pressure. Another pause. Because I knew it wasn't the absence of fear. It was a choice. Made under fire in real time, in a corridor that was trying to kill us both. Ethan was quiet. I want that in my organization, she said. Not because of what it looks like. Because of what it actually is. He sat at the kitchen table for a long moment. He thought about the morning he'd driven away from the base for the last time. The uniform he'd folded and packed, the specific clarity of a decision made under grief and love, simultaneously leaving something that had been his entire adult identity to go home to a 2-year-old girl who had just lost her mother and needed her father to be present in a way that the Marines, with everything they'd given him, couldn't accommodate. He'd never regretted it. Not once. Not even on the hard days. Not even on the days when the quiet of his life sat on him differently than he'd expected. But he had sometimes, on certain nights when Sophie was asleep and the house was still, felt the edge of something. The awareness that he had been built for a larger purpose than the work he was doing. Not a wish to go back. Not a rejection of the life he'd chosen. Just the honest recognition that capacity unused has a weight of its own. When do you need an answer? He asked. When you're ready to give one, she said. No deadline, no pressure. But Walker, I want you to know that the answer I'm hoping for is yes. He almost said it then. He could feel it, the yes sitting right there, ready to be said. But he'd learned a long time ago that the decisions that matter most deserve at least one night of sleeping on them. Not because he was uncertain, but because the ones you're certain about deserve to be certain with a night behind them. I'll call you tomorrow, he said. Good night, Walker. He sat at the table for another 20 minutes. Then he went to bed. He slept better than he had any right to. He woke at 6, made coffee, made Sophie's breakfast, drove her to school, came back, sat at the kitchen table with his second cup and his phone. He thought about the cracked windshield. He thought about it carefully, not with resentment, not with self-pity, but with the clear-eyed practicality of a man taking an honest inventory. The windshield was a small thing, but it was a symbol of a category of small things he'd been managing around for 6 years. And those categories had a way of accumulating. He thought about Sophie at 18, at 22, at the point where what he had been able to build during these years would determine what was possible for her after them. He thought about the corridor on the 4th floor of the Harbor Crest Hotel. The way he'd read that space. The way the reading had come from everything he was, the Marine training, the safety work, the years of walking through buildings and learning their languages. He thought about the fact that nobody in that building had done what he'd done, not because they didn't care, but because they didn't have the specific combinations of things that he had. That combination didn't belong to him alone. It could be built into an organization. It could be taught. It could be the difference. In the next building, between 14 casualties and none, he picked up his phone. He called Victoria Reynolds. She answered on the second ring. "Yes," he said. A pause. Then in a voice that was precise and warm and entirely without performance. "Good. I want to start the first week of next month," he said. "Sophie has a school presentation on the 2nd. I need to be there. Put it in the calendar," Victoria said. "That's exactly what I mean." He hung up. He sat for a moment. He looked at the cracked windshield through the kitchen window, the truck parked in the driveway, the crack running across the lower right corner where a piece of gravel had hit it 3 months ago and he'd put fixing it on the list. He picked his phone back up and called the Auto Glass Place on Mercer Street. Made an appointment for Thursday. He put his phone down and drank his coffee. It was a small thing, but the small things were where everything actually lived. That afternoon, Carla Diaz called with the final update on the investigation's initial phase. Warren Castillo had been formally charged of 4 counts, including conspiracy to commit industrial espionage, conspiracy to commit fraud, and 2 counts related to the placement of the explosive device. His attorney had entered a not guilty plea. The case would move toward trial. Derek Solis had entered a full cooperation agreement. His testimony about Castillo's operation went back 14 months, a carefully constructed plan built around ARCA's development timeline that Castillo had memorized during his board tenure. The sabotage of the building systems, the timing of the explosion, the planted narrative designed to point at the building inspector, all of it had been planned in detail. Gerald Foss had been a reluctant participant. Castillo's organization had identified him as a pressure point. 8 weeks earlier, a man with financial problems in a position that gave him exactly the access they needed and had applied that pressure with the specific efficiency of people who knew how to find a weak spot and use it. His cooperation was now complete. His future was in the hands of people whose job was to calculate what complete cooperation was worth. "Your inspection reports are going to be central to the prosecution case," Diaz told him. "We'll need you available as a witness when the time comes. Possibly 2 years from now, maybe more. You good with that?" "Yes." She paused. "Off the record from me personally." Another pause. "What you did in that building, the 2 trips, the documentation, the calls you made before the fire started, that's the difference between a case we can build and a case that falls apart because the only physical evidence was compromised in the explosion. A beat. You weren't supposed to be the one holding the line. But you were, and it matters." He held that for a moment. "Do your job, Diaz," he said. He heard her almost smile through the phone. "You too, Walker." He hung up. The story ran that evening, the corrected version. The real version, the one that Channel 4 anchored, with an exclusive interview with Victoria Reynolds that she had promised the news director in exchange for pulling the original piece. The interview was 8 minutes long. Ethan watched it on his laptop at the kitchen table while Sophie did her reading in the other room. Victoria was precise and composed and devastating. She described what had happened. She described what Ethan had done, not dramatically, not with embellishment, with the specific, credible authority of a first-hand witness who knew exactly what she was talking about because she had been there. She described the corridor. She described the stairwell. She described the moment he'd told her to go and had turned back up the stairs. And then the interviewer asked her, "When you look back at that night, what stands out most?" Victoria Reynolds looked at the camera for exactly 1 second before she answered. "The fact that nobody in that building, myself included, had any idea who was in the room with them," she said. "A man who had spent years learning how to keep people safe, who had made every right call before anything went wrong, who was dismissed because of how he looked, and then did the job anyway." She paused. That's not a story about a hero. It's a story about what happens when we decide that someone isn't worth listening to before we've heard them. Sophie appeared in the kitchen doorway. She had her book in her hand, one finger holding her page. She'd heard the TV. She looked at the screen at Victoria Reynolds, and then at her father. "Is that her?" she asked. Sophie looked at the screen for a moment. Then she looked at him. "She's good at talking. She's good at a lot of things," he said. Sophie nodded, satisfied with this assessment, and went back to her reading. Ethan closed the laptop. He sat in the quiet kitchen. Through the window, the September evening was doing what September evenings in Seattle did, going gray and cool and quietly beautiful in a way that required no dramatic acknowledgement, just presence. He thought about what Victoria had said. The fact that nobody knew who was in the room with them. He thought about that differently than she'd meant it. She'd meant it as a critique of the systems that make people invisible, of the assumptions that dismiss capability based on surface appearance. And she was right. That was part of it. But there was another way to hold it. The fact that nobody knew who he was had been, in the end, the thing that let him do what he did. He'd moved through that building because nobody was watching him. He'd seen what he saw because he wasn't there to be seen, he was there to see. He'd flagged what he flagged, documented what he documented. Moved when he moved, without the weight of reputation or visibility or anyone's expectations of what a person like him should do in a situation like this. He'd just done the job. That was all it had ever been. The job done right, because the job mattered, because the building was full of people, because the alternative to going in was living with having known you could have and didn't. He got up. He looked in on Sophie, who was reading with the focused absorption that told him she was in the part of the book where things were happening, and the world outside the book had stopped existing for her. He didn't interrupt. He went back to the kitchen and stood at the counter and thought about Thursday's glass appointment. About the first day at Arca, the first week of next month. About Sophie's presentation on the second. About all the ordinary, specific, irreplaceable particulars of a life that was entirely his. His phone buzzed. A text from Colonel Marsh. 4 words. The same as Diaz, but different ones. "Proud of you, Captain." He stared at it for a long moment. Then he typed back 2 words. "Thank you, sir." He put the phone in his pocket. He opened the refrigerator. He started making dinner. The first week of October came in quietly. The way important things sometimes do without announcement. Without ceremony. Just the ordinary Tuesday morning of a man making his daughter's breakfast and thinking about what the day held. Ethan had spent the last 3 weeks in what Victoria's HR director called the onboarding process, and what Ethan privately called the education phase, not because he was learning the job, but because he was learning the organization, the people, the pressure points, the places where Sarka's safety infrastructure was strong, and the places where it had been built on assumptions that felt solid until someone with his specific background looked at them and saw the gaps. He'd found 11 gaps in 3 weeks. He'd documented all 11. He'd reported all 11 directly to Victoria, as agreed. The same day he found each one. She had acted on every single one within 48 hours. No pushback, no delay. No version of what Gerald Fosse had given him, the practiced dismissal. The hand reaching for the phone, the "we'll look into it" that meant nothing. Just action, the specific, immediate action of a woman who had learned something in a burning corridor that she was not going to unlearn. That was the thing he hadn't fully anticipated about working for Victoria Reynolds. Not the salary, not the authority, the fact that she listened. Actually listened not with the performed attention of a person waiting for their turn to speak, but with the focused, hungry attention of someone who understood that the persons across the table from her had information she needed, and that getting it required actually hearing it. He'd told Sophie about the job 2 days after he'd said yes. They were in the truck on the way to school, which was where he told her things that required a contained space and a finite timeline, enough time to say it. Not so much time that it became a bigger conversation than it needed to be at that moment. I'm starting a new job, he said. She'd looked at him. The lady from the building? Her company. Yeah. Is it safer than going into burning buildings? He'd almost smiled. In general, yes. In general, she repeated, in the tone of someone filing the imprecision for later. What does in general mean exactly? It means the building inspector days are probably done. The new job is making sure other buildings don't have the problems that one had. She'd thought about this for the length of 2 blocks. Then, so you're doing the same thing but from the other side. Yeah. Exactly that. Okay. She'd looked out the window. Does it pay more? He'd laughed a real laugh, the kind that comes from a place that's surprised into it. Yeah, baby, it pays more. Good, she'd said. The windshield was embarrassing. He'd had the windshield fixed the Thursday before. She hadn't mentioned it until now. He should have known she'd been noting it. The new truck came the 2nd week of October. He hadn't planned on a new truck, he'd planned on a used one. Something practical, 2 or 3 years old. But Sophie had found a 4-year-old pickup at a dealership in Bellevue, with a clean service record and a back seat big enough for her school things and her soccer gear. And she'd presented him with the information in the form of a printed sheet with the vehicle history report attached. And he'd looked at it and looked at her, and understood that she had been thinking about this longer than the conversation that morning. You researched this, he said. I Googled it, she said. There's a difference. He bought the truck. The morning of November 3rd, 6 weeks after Harbor Crest. 4 weeks into the new job, Ethan got a call at 6:45 from a number he didn't recognize with a Washington, D.C. area code. The same area code that had called and left no message the day after the fire. He answered, Mr. Walker. A woman's voice. Official in tone but not cold. The voice of someone in a position of real authority who had decided to make this call personally rather than delegate it. My name is Admiral Sandra Krause. I'm the Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Fleet Readiness. I apologize for the early hour. Ethan was standing in his kitchen with his coffee. He set the cup down, Admiral. I'll be direct with you, she said. I've been briefed extensively on the events at the Harbor Crest Hotel and the subsequent investigation. I've also been briefed on the ARCA Defense Systems technology that was the target of the operation. The signals platform that Ms. Reynolds was presenting that evening represents a capability that is genuinely critical to national security readiness in a way that I don't need to detail for you. What I do need to tell you is that your actions that night, both in preserving the physical evidence that led to the successful prosecution and in ensuring that the people in that building survived, have been noted at a level considerably above Colonel Marsh's. Ethan said nothing. He waited. We would like to speak with you, Krause said. Not about a position, not about a return to active service, I understand. That is not something you're considering. What I'd like to discuss is a consulting arrangement. Periodic, on your terms, under a framework that would accommodate your responsibilities at ARCA and your personal schedule. She paused. Your former emergency authorization code, the one Marsh referenced that night, was active because a decision was made 8 years ago to leave it active. That decision was made because people at my level believed there would come a moment when we'd be glad it was there. The kitchen was very quiet. You were right, Ethan said. We were, she agreed. Think about it. There's no timeline. The call is yours to make. A pause. And Mr. Walker, what you did for those people in that building, and what you did for this country's security interests by preventing that technology from leaving that parking garage. I want you to hear that from someone who can say it with the full weight of what it means. Well done. She hung up. Ethan stood in his kitchen for a long moment. The coffee was getting cold. He could hear Sophie moving around upstairs, the particular thump and shuffle of a 9-year-old getting ready for school. He picked up his coffee and drank it cold because it was there, and he wasn't ready to move yet. An admiral had just called him at 6:45 in the morning to say well done. He thought about the parking structure, about the folding table, and the terrible coffee, and Diaz's measured voice, laying out what was being built against him. He thought about the 14 hours between and walking out of the federal building into the cold October morning. He thought about Fosse's lie, about Castillo's plan, about the careful architecture of a frame constructed around the assumption that a man's noticed was best man nobody would defend. They'd been wrong about that, not because he was important, not because his past made him untouchable, but because the truth had witnesses. And the witnesses had done their jobs and the evidence had survived because he'd documented it before anyone knew it needed to be documented. He'd done the job right. That was all. And doing the job right, when everything else was working against it, turned out to be enough. Sophie came downstairs at 7:10, backpack on, jacket half-zipped, the expression of someone who had remembered something important at the last possible moment. "I have library books due today," she said. "Where are they?" That's the thing. He found 2 of the 3 library books in 11 minutes. The third was under her bed, which she discovered herself while he made her toast, and she appeared in the kitchen, holding it up like evidence. "Under the bed," she said. "I'll add it to the investigation files," he said. She sat down. She ate her toast. He stood at the counter and watched her, and thought about Admiral Krause's call, and about the consulting arrangement, and about what it would mean to say yes to that, alongside everything else. The complexity of it, the layers, the fact that his life, which had been quiet and deliberate and carefully contained for 6 years, had in the span of 6 weeks become something considerably larger. He was not afraid of larger. He'd lived larger. He'd left it deliberately. The question was whether the larger he was walking into now was the kind that would hold its shape around the things that mattered: Sophie's school presentations and library books and Tuesday's pasta, or the kind that would slowly, with the best intentions, pull those things out of the center. He thought about what Victoria had said the morning after Harbor Crest. The schedule built around the fact that you have a daughter in school. He thought about what she'd done when he'd said those were his conditions. She'd said, agreed without hesitation, and then she'd made it true. 4 weeks in, she'd made it true every single time it came up. That told him something about what kind of larger this was. "Dad?" Sophie said. She was looking at him with the direct attention that meant she'd been watching him think and had decided he'd had enough time. "You're doing the thing." "What thing?" "The thing where you stare at the counter and your jaw gets tight. You did that a lot when you were deciding about the ARCA job." She ate the last of her toast. "What are you deciding now?" He looked at her. 9 years old. Homework on the table, and library books in her backpack, and toast crumbs on her chin. "Someone called this morning," he said. "They want me to do some additional work." "Occasional. On top of the ARCA job, the military kind?" He paused. Yes, she thought about this, for exactly as long as it deserved. "Would you be home for dinner?" "Most nights, yes." "Would you miss school stuff?" "I would do everything I could to make sure I didn't." She looked at him. "But sometimes you might." He held her eyes. "Sometimes I might." Sophie picked up her juice. She drank it. She set it down. "Okay," she said. He blinked. "Okay? Dad." She looked at him with the specific patience of a child who has been parented well enough to understand something important. "You went back into a burning building twice. For people you didn't know. Because you could, and they needed you to." She held his eyes the way he held people's eyes when he needed them to actually hear him. "You think I don't know that's who you are?" A pause. "I just want dinner when you're home." He sat very still. "And I want to know when you're going to be gone," she said. "I don't want to be surprised. That's all." He stood up and crossed to the table and hugged her, which she accepted with the mild tolerance of a 9-year-old who had been hugged unexpectedly before breakfast and had a schedule to maintain. "Okay," he said. "Into the top of her head, deal." "Good." She patted his arm. "Can we go?" "I don't want to be late." He called Admiral Krause, back at 9:15 from his office at ARCA. He said yes with conditions. The conditions were the same ones he'd given Victoria: the schedule, the direct reporting, the fact that his family came first. Krause agreed to all of them in the same direct, unadorned way that Victoria had agreed to hers. "There's one more thing," he said. "Go ahead." The work I do consulting. Whatever the correct terminology is, I want it to mean something. I'm not interested in lending my name to a framework. If you call me, it's because there's a specific problem that specifically needs what I know. If that's not the situation, don't call me. A pause. Then something in Krause's voice shifted in a way he recognized the shift that happens in people who are used to people trying to get things and have just encountered someone trying to give terms. Agreed, she said. Mr. Walker, I think you're going to find that the situation will more than meet that requirement. He hung up. He sat at his desk in the ARCA office in Redmond, his desk. His office, the Safety Operations Center he'd spent the first week designing from scratch, because the previous ADSEP had been built around workflows that didn't account for the actual dynamics of physical risk assessment, and he thought about the trajectory of the last 6 weeks. October had arrived. The story that Channel 4 had run and corrected had been replaced. In the public's attention, by the story of the arrest and the charges and the extraordinary details of a corporate espionage operation that had come within 12 minutes of succeeding. His name was in that story. He couldn't stop that. Hadn't tried, but the way it appeared had been, to his significant relief, exactly what he'd asked Victoria for. Not a hero's narrative. Not a profile. A fact. A building safety inspector who documented what he found and got people out. That was all. The articles that tried to make more of it than that, there were a few. He read them, and then put his phone down and moved on. He could not control. What he could control was what he did next, and the next thing, and the one after that. 3 weeks into the job, he'd sat across from Victoria in her office and laid out a complete structural revision of ARCA's safety protocols across all 4 facilities. The revision had taken him 9 days to develop. It was 43 pages. It was built around one central principle: the person closest to the problem has to have a direct line to the authority that can act on it. No filters, no management layers, no Gerald Fosses. Victoria had read all 43 pages. He knew she'd read them because the questions she asked were too specific for anything less. Then she'd looked at him across the desk and said, "How fast can you implement this?" 6 weeks for the priority items, he said. 6 months for the full revision. Start tomorrow, she said. That was how it worked with her. He was still getting used to it. He was still getting used to a lot of things. The office. The salary number in his bank account that still looked like someone else's account when he checked it. The fact that people in meetings introduced him and then stepped back and waited for him to speak rather than talking over him. The fact that when he spoke, they wrote things down. The invisibility was gone. He hadn't asked for that. He didn't particularly want it. But he understood. In the clear-eyed way he understood most things. That it was the cost of the thing that had happened in that hotel. The world had looked up and seen him in one specific moment of fire and consequence, and it was not possible to make the world look back down. So he used the visibility the way he used everything else practically, purposefully, in service of the work. The last week of November, the trial date for Warren Castillo was formally scheduled. 2 years out, as Diaz had predicted, Ethan was listed as a material witness. His attorney confirmed that the defense would likely attempt to challenge the inspection report's chain of custody, which was routine strategy, which was why the documentation had been so thorough, which was why they would fail. He got the news on a Wednesday. He read the email from his attorney. He noted the trial date in his calendar, 2 years out. A Wednesday in November that might as well have been another planet from where he was standing right now. He closed the email and went to the next item on his list. On the Friday of that week, he attended Sophie's fall concert. She played the violin third chair, second from the left in the violin section. A fact she had communicated to him with the precision of someone who needed him to find her quickly in a crowd. He found her immediately. He always found her immediately. She played a piece he didn't know, something the school orchestra had spent 3 months learning. A formal piece with enough complexity that the sound of 32 kids attempting it together was genuinely impressive, in a way that made the parents in the auditorium lean forward slightly, without knowing they were doing it. She was good. He'd known she was good because he heard her practice. But hearing her in the full context of the orchestra was different. The way she held her head, the way her bow moved, the focus that had been in her face since she was small and working on things that mattered to her. He watched her play and thought about nothing else. Afterward, in the school lobby, with the concert crowd noise and the kids streaming out their cases and their parents finding their faces in the crowd, Sophie appeared at his elbow. She still had the violin in its case. Had it on her back, the way she wore her backpack settled. Natural, part of the shape of her. "You came," she said. "I told I'd come, I know." She looked at him. "But I know you had a thing this afternoon. The thing ended at 3. Concert's at 6. Math works out." She considered this. The Admiral thing or the Victoria thing? He blinked. She had very good hearing and a very good memory, and he should never have forgotten either of those facts. "The Victoria thing," he said. "Okay." She hitched the violin case up on her shoulder. "Can we get pizza?" "Yes." "The place on 5th? "Sure." "Can I get the one with the arugula? You can get whatever you want." She nodded, satisfied, and started toward the door. Then she stopped and looked back at him with an expression that had so much in it, the 9-year-old face and the old eyes and the thing she'd gotten from her mother, and the thing that was entirely, unmistakably her own. "Dad," she said. "Yeah, I'm glad you're the way you are," she said it simply. The way she said things that she'd thought about and decided deserved to be said plainly. "I know it's hard sometimes, being you, but I'm glad." He stood in the school lobby with the noise around them, and the violin on her back, and the honest, undecorated declaration of a 9-year-old who had learned from the man who raised her that truth was worth saying directly. He didn't say anything for a moment, because there wasn't anything to say that was equal to it. Then he said, "Let's get pizza." She smiled. They went. The months moved away. Months move when a life is finally running the way it was built to run, not dramatically. Not with the urgent tempo of a crisis, but with the steady, accumulating weight of good work done consistently by someone who has found the place where what they are and what they do are the same thing. Ethan Walker became, over the year that followed, someone that people in his industry knew. Not famous, not a public figure in any way he'd agreed to or sought, but known in the specific professional community of people who thought seriously about safety and risk, and the gap between the two as the man who saw what others missed. Who asked the questions that weren't being asked? Who built the systems that held? Colonel Marsh called him every few months, not about work, just to call. Carla Diaz sent him a single text the day Castillo's defense team entered a guilty plea 22 months after the arrest, sparing the trial that had been scheduled. The text said, "Told you," he texted back. Victoria Reynolds. In the way that the best professional relationships develop when they're built on something real, became over time and carefully, and without either of them making a declaration about it, a person he trusted. Not the way he trusted Marsh, with the bond of shared history in impossible places. Something different. The trust that develops between two people who have been tested by the same fire and found out, separately and together, what they were made of. On a Tuesday in March, a Tuesday, because Tuesdays had become the specific day of their direct meetings. The standing appointment that everyone else at ARCA scheduled around without being asked to. She looked across at him and said, "Are you happy?" He looked at her. The question landed differently than it would have from anyone else, because she asked it the way she asked everything directly, without cushioning, expecting an honest answer. He thought about Sophie's violin, about the new truck without the cracked windshield, about Admiral Krause's call and Marsh's text and the 43-page safety revision that was now the living infrastructure of 4 facilities, about Tuesday pasta and library books under the bed and the school lobby, and "I'm glad you're the way you are." "Yeah," he said. "I am." She nodded, once. The way people nod when they believe the answer and are glad to believe it. She went back to the report in front of her. He went back to the one in front of him. The work continued. The way good work does not with fanfare. Not with an audience. Just with the steady, unspectacular commitment of two people in a room, doing something that mattered. Outside, Seattle moved through its March morning. Traffic and coffee shops and the ordinary, irreplaceable noise of a city going about its life. Indifferent and beautiful, and full of buildings that held their people safe, because someone, somewhere had done the job right. Ethan Walker had learned in a burning corridor, in a parking structure, in the rain, in a diner booth, and a school lobby, and a kitchen at 6 in the morning, that the greatest thing a man can choose is not the thing that makes him look powerful. It is the thing that makes him worth coming home to. And every night, without fail, without exception, without the cracked windshield and without the invisibility, and with the same core that had always been there underneath the old jacket and the toolbox, he came home. That was the whole story. That was all of it. And it was enough.